Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. You've all heard the news. Recently, the Supreme Court of the United States voted 6-3 to overturn Roe v. Wade, a court case and decision which essentially allowed for abortion nationwide for nearly 50 years. Recall that a draft of this decision was leaked a few months ago, so while the verdict was not surprising, it still sent shockwaves across America. For pro-lifers, this decision was welcome news, ending abortion, which according to some pro-life stats resulted in the death of over 63 million unborn babies. For pro-choice supporters, this news was gut-wrenching. Immediately, people took to the streets in what was called a night of rage. In Canada, even Prime Minister Justin Trudeau weighed in, declaring, "The news coming out of the United States is horrific. My heart goes out to the millions of American women who are now set to lose their legal right to an abortion. I can't imagine the fear and anger you are feeling right now." And he added, "I want women in Canada to know that we will always stand up for your right to choose." So will abortion be eradicated in a post-Roe v. Wade America? Which states will bring in legislation for access and which ones won't? Well, joining me now to share her perspective on the matter is Catherine Glen Foster, lawyer and president with Americans United for Life. Catherine, thank you so much for joining me today. I know it must be so busy for many of Americans who are stakeholders in this issue. So I really appreciate you coming on. I think off the bat, we should start off. Can you please unpack the decision for us?
Yeah, basically what this decision said is that Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the 1992 case that upheld that core holding of Roe, and all of the other abortion cases up at the Supreme Court and all the cases that relied on it, all of the abortion progeny from Roe v. Wade, all of that is overturned. And so no longer in America is there this legal regime that's been in place for 49 years that purports to allow for a right to abortion. This is something that isn't really a surprise for court watchers or for legal pundits, because for 49 years now, pundits and legal scholars on both the left and the right, pro-abortion and pro-life, had been saying that Roe v. Wade was a terrible decision. It was wrongly decided, was not grounded in the US Constitution. And even those people who support abortion rights, they still said this was not a good decision. It was not the way to go. This really should be an issue for the legislatures and not for the US Supreme Court.
And when you say legislatures, you mean the state legislatures. We have provinces in Canada, so it's sort of a decentralizing of the issue. So rather than the federal court deciding because as you said, it's not tethered to the Constitution, that it now will be decentralized and states can individually determine how they want to proceed?
That's where we are now. This can take place in the United States. This kind of debate, this kind of bill or law can take place at either the state or the federal level, even the local level in some instances. And so we've seen some legislation at the federal level be introduced. We have some life protective legislation and policies at the federal level. We have no national level, any kind of bill, law, or policy currently in play that supports abortion. Such bills have been introduced, most notably recently the Women's Health Protection Act, which is a little bit deceptively named there, but I was able to testify against that. That's been introduced, but it has not actually passed. And so right now, even though we're going to be focused on the federal level, focused on defending against radical legislation like that act, trying to advance pro-life, life-affirming law at the federal level, we're primarily focused on the state level, as we have been for 51 years now.
And when I first booked you for this interview, Roe v. Wade wasn't overturned, and I thought we were going to have this fulsome discussion on some of those state legislations, and we will still get to that probably in the next segment. But that's the conversation I thought we'd have, and then all of a sudden, Roe v. Wade was overturned. You mentioned that it wasn't a surprise decision from the left or the right. Even the left, the pro-abortion advocates, would said that it was a poor decision almost 50 years ago when it was released, and I guess you could suggest it was maybe ripe for the overturning?
It was ready to be overturned. People were expecting it. Legal scholars expected it. The woman who argued Planned Parenthood v. Casey expected it. And really, all Americans expected it because it was simply unjust, and we were ready for human rights to rule the day.
Okay, we'll pick up this discussion in just a few moments. Welcome back. We have Catherine Glen Foster, lawyer and president of Americans United for Life, joining us, and we're discussing the recent overturning of Roe v. Wade in the United States. Thank you again, Catherine, for joining us. Prior to this, maybe a surprising, maybe not surprising overturning of Roe v. Wade, your organization and you as the head of it were very instrumental in passing a lot of state legislation a pro-life state legislation. Could you tell us about some of those pieces of legislation state to state? And do you feel they were incremental or helpful in the overturning of Roe v. Wade?
In the United States, we were able to pass state by state legislation. It's a different kind of regime than up there in Canada. And so that was what we were pursuing incrementally for the last 49 years, even though we were told abortion is a right. It's in the Constitution. Somehow they found it in there. We said, okay, well, what can we do to protect life? And so over the decades, we passed hundreds of pro-life laws, state by state by state. They did a number of different things. Some were gestational age limits, preventing at least late-term elective abortions where you could just deliver the child and place the child in a loving home through adoption. Really in that case, you're preventing the pain that the child experiences during an abortion and reducing the just staggering risk of maternal mortality and complications to the mother in late-term abortions. So we passed laws like that. We were advancing laws like waiting periods, laws like informed consent, making sure that women actually know what an abortion is, all of the risks and everything that go along with it. We were passing laws to protect against discrimination in the womb, make sure that there were health and safety standards, a number of different types of laws to protect women and children while we were still living under that Roe regime.
So were these incremental or in some cases gestational legislation, was this helpful in reducing the overall number of abortions? And you mentioned one about informed consent, and I think that's very important, and especially in this post-COVID world. Informed consent has been a big thing, especially surrounding the vaccine mandates, especially here in Canada. With informed consent for women going for abortion, did some women change their mind? Was this actually practically helpful?
It absolutely was. So many women changed their mind, found a better way, were able to be connected with resources thanks to these incremental laws. Not only did they save lives directly, and we have research that shows that millions of lives were saved thanks to pro-life law and policy. But in addition to that, there's that educational factor, because when you're introducing a pro-life bill or you're passing a life-affirming law, it gets people talking about this issue. It gets people understanding a little bit more what the current situation is with abortion law and abortion, and they start talking about what should be. And we also know that the more people learn about and discuss abortion, the more life-affirming their views become, the more they realize, okay, this thing in the womb is not just a blob of tissue or a clump of cells. We're looking at the ultrasound. Science is telling us it's a human being. And then when do human rights attach? Do all human beings get human rights, or do we want to carve out some classes of human beings who don't get human rights? And then how can we better support and enable, young moms in need to be able to choose life? Because we know that across the board, first trimester to late-term abortions, the reasons why young women were choosing abortion are largely the same. We're talking about financial issues, relationship concerns, and just not feeling ready to be a parent. And all of those are areas where we can come alongside a young woman. We can help her with that. We can give her resources. We can give her support, counseling, advice, connect her with what she needs. All of those are areas where we as a humane society, we need to be doing that anyway. And then when we do that, the bonus is that she's more and more likely to choose life.
You mentioned that, and the way I've seen this issue for many years is it's pretty legal. It's you're right. It's about human rights. Does this class of humans, are they afforded human rights or not? Do they deserve it or not? Who's excluded? Who's included? And I think it really does come down to that. It comes down to the humanity or the personhood of the unborn, of the fetus, whichever term you'd like to use. Do you feel that Americans have really understood this? Again, sorry, we only have 15 seconds left, but is that a concept that Americans understand?
Americans have not. We're still learning. We still need education and awareness. Most Americans didn't know that Roe v. Wade was even about abortion or the century it was decided in.
Wow.
So it's a continuing project.
Okay, we'll pick this up in just a few moments. Welcome back. We have Catherine Glen Foster, president of Americans United for Life, joining us to unpack the Roe v. Wade decision and actually the climate surrounding the abortion issue in America in general. Catherine, again, thank you so much for joining me. In May, in very early May, the Supreme Court decision was leaked. And, there are many concerns around the leaking of such a confidential decision. I think many folks around the world were wondering if the decision would change in that time or if anything would change. Clearly it didn't. It was overturned, and that should have its own investigation. But according to the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, there have been 49 incidents of arson, vandalism, and harassment committed by pro-choice activists since that decision, when there was the hint that this would be overturned. Violence against establishments, pregnancy centers, that kind of thing, just skyrocketed. How has your experience been in that regard?
They listed 49 instances. If you include all of the different threats, the emails, the phone calls, all of that, the number is actually far higher, tragically. It's been disappointing to see the reaction to just even a leak, even a plan of a decision. And we know that some of these threats and attacks have been severe, very severe. We're talking Molotov cocktails. We're talking about firebombing. We're talking about spray painting churches, things like that. These people going into churches and trying to take off their clothes and protest, and just horrible kinds of displays of the basest type of human behavior. But there's been so much more as well, just threats and so on. And what I think has been really interesting is that the people who are doing this, they have no desire to dialogue. They have no desire to build a bridge or build understanding or work together to find common ground for the future and to help women. In fact, I was just talking about this with some colleagues yesterday, that you would think that this would be the instigator to start talking about how to resource these young women and how to improve our social safety nets and so on. And yet instead, all we're hearing from the other side is codify Roe. That's the only answer.
Well, and when you say, be prepared for a night of rage, when you hear this coming out, and to me, this is the unhinged left. I mean, a night of rage. This is absurd. And hearing about these acts of arson and violence and trespassing and harassment, it's quite disturbing. Is there a double standard? Is the FBI or the police handling this violence properly? Does the violence also go the other way? Are pro-lifers, have they been historically violent when Roe v. Wade passed?
Not at all. When you look at when Roe v. Wade passed, what did pro-lifers do? We joined peacefully to march for life. When Planned Parenthood v. Casey came down, and we thought that Roe would be overturned after almost 20 years at that point. And then we were disappointed. We continued to march. We continued peaceful, nonviolent protest. That's what we've always been about, because we're pro-life. The other side, they'll point to a couple of fringe people who were not part of the movement, who used the abortion issue to commit terrible crimes. But that simply is not what the movement is. And so this whole idea of a night of rage, now that this Dobbs has been the case that Casey wasn't. We're going to continue to march for life. We're going to continue to work to protect and support women and get them those resources they need. We're going to be expanding our care, and I think it's disappointing that any Americans would resort to just, burning down cities or shouting or anything like that, just because they're disappointed in a decision.
So, is the American culture, are you ready for this kind of change? I mean, it says culture might be, you change the law, you could change the hearts. Are we now going back where we can expect Americans to now say, you know what, no, we're not comfortable with abortion. We don't want something like Roe v. Wade again?
It goes both ways, law and culture, right? Both inform each other. And so this is a huge step forward. As I said, most Americans, even though they don't really understand what Roe v. Wade was, and they don't really understand the state of abortion law, when you ask them, they, for the, in huge numbers, 90% of Americans understand and agree that an abortion ends the life of a human being in the womb before birth. 90% of Americans, 75% wanted abortion rolled back at least to the 12-week mark, which would put us in line with, sadly, not Canada, but with most of the world. We were right alongside.
Sorry, I'm going to pause you right there, and we're going to talk about Canada in just a few moments. Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion on the recent passing of Roe v. Wade, and joining us is Catherine Glen Foster, President of Americans United for Life. Catherine, before we went to commercial break, we sort of hinted at the status in Canada. And in my opener, I quoted from our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. And, one thing that he said in his comments is, I want women in Canada to know that we will always stand up for your right to choose. Well, Canada, we don't have a right to abortion. It simply doesn't exist. In fact, as you may be aware, and you can expand on this, we actually have no law on abortion in Canada. Are Americans even aware? Probably not, because you're probably more concerned with your own law. But we don't have a Roe v. Wade. We don't have something like this.
That's exactly right. And so in Canada, it really is kind of like the Wild West, where there is no national law or no national standard. We didn't have that kind of situation here in the U.S. We had this national precedent from our Supreme Court, but I don't think most Americans are aware of the situation in Canada. That's part of what we've been trying to educate folks on, because they don't understand just how radical some of these nations are. The U.S., Canada, China, North Korea, some of these nations where there's just no national law, or the national law is quite bad on life. And so it's disappointing to me to hear Justin Trudeau talking about defending a woman's right to choose. That's simply not the case. And if we're trying to support women, then that's going in the polar opposite direction. We need to be working to support women and actually giving them resources and hope and life-affirming options, and making sure that we get to the root of the problem, because abortion is a sign that we have failed women. Every single abortion is the result of a failure somewhere along the way. And so we need to get to the heart of those failures and make sure that we're rectifying those as we work to reduce and eliminate abortion.
So we only have a couple more minutes left of this interview. And of course, many folks who are spectating this issue or very active in it on both sides, the pro-abortion or pro-life side, are wondering, what will we see state to state? Could you give us some insight as to what, we could expect to see? Which states do we think might, bring in legislation that will keep women's right to abortion, or enshrine that for their state, or which jurisdictions might, take this opportunity and say, okay, we're going to actually, in fact, pass more restrictive measures?
Several states already have ended abortion, Missouri being the first, state after state following. A lot of these states had had laws on the books for decades, but it had been enjoined by courts because of Roe v. Wade. Those laws that were duly enacted weren't able to be in force. Now, even as I speak, more and more states are scheduling sessions, are making plans to continue to pass good life-affirming legislation that will support women and children and will really bolster their state laws. So right now we are looking at about a third of states where abortion is going to be gone. It's going to be a pro-life state, a state where they're really looking to resource women in the way that Texas did when they tried to end abortion, but they also sent extraordinary funds towards supporting women. About a third of the states may go in the other direction. They're going to be like New York or California, where they're doing everything they can to even go beyond Roe and have even more abortion than even Roe contemplated. And then about a third of states will be in the middle. They're going to be, looking at what women need. They're going to be saying, okay, let's make sure that we have the informed consent. Let's make sure that we have health and safety standards. Let's make sure that we at least get rid of those elective late term abortions when we could just deliver the child. And so, in that way, state after state is going to be examining their laws and we hope becoming more life affirming for all women and men and those babies.
Okay, we only have 15 seconds left. What does America look like in 10 years with this issue?
America in 10 years is going to be a much more life affirming America with more children, more joy, and more understanding of what exactly life is.
Okay, Catherine, thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Abortion is obviously a very heated, very divisive issue with a lot of emotions running on both sides. In light of Roe v. Wade passing, what does abortion access for those who seek it look like in America? Well, as of right now, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. But states to state, they will pass legislation. So keep an eye on this issue because you will see things shifting very quickly. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick Allen.